Great. Good evening, everyone. Tonight we have Jeff Chartier with us from Access Consulting to talk about motor vehicle insurance and best practices before submitting a claim. So welcome, Jeff. Thanks for being here with us tonight.
And thank you very much for having me. So this is a combination of a virtual meeting and one that'll be recorded for the YouTube channel and the website. But what's really great about this presentation is it came directly from someone that had this experience. So this is someone that I work with, that I like working with very much, and I've worked with him for a very long time. And he's given me an account of his experience, but also the things that he did right before being in an accident, and some of the experiences that he wants to pass on, both because there were learning experiences for him or there are things that he handled well in that process. He is available to shout instructions from off screen, or if I forget my lines, to shout me my lines. So thank you for that. But for reasons that we're not going to go into, we're going to keep him off camera for now. But he is absolutely available if needed. So this is the first-hand account of a motor vehicle accident. MVA is the code that is used within the rehabilitation industry to describe a motor vehicle accident. So that's what MVA stands for. And this happens to be a motorcycle accident. So an individual on a motorcycle struck by a vehicle. So you can imagine that you're much more vulnerable on a motorcycle. You don't have a frame of a car built around you. And like many cases that you're going to hear about, it has nothing to do with how well you navigate your vehicle. In the case of this incident, the vehicle that the person that got injured was driving was not moving, but the car that hit him was. So that's really unfortunate. While we're doing this, I'm also just going to navigate the chat and whatnot. So, so questions, we're going to do the best we can to ask them in the end, but I really don't mind if a question pops in. You can unmute yourself and ask, and I don't mind at all if that occurs. So what do we want to chat about first? So you're in an accident, and now what? So one thing I can say for sure is the picture of that motorcycle is a before picture, because after an accident, the motorcycle doesn't look like that. That one's shiny and scratch-free, and when struck by a vehicle, especially at high speed, the motorcycle is not good, not fit for use anymore. But so what are the first things you're supposed to do if you're struck by a vehicle? So first thing, make sure you're okay. And here's one of the things that you really need to keep in mind when we're talking about the brain and potential brain injury. Even if you're not okay, you probably should still make sure, because the part of your body that's required to assess your well-being may not be working properly at that time. It's an invisible injury a lot of the times. They're called closed head injuries. So if you aren't bleeding from the skull or don't appear to have large lacerations on your head, that does not mean your brain is okay. So ensure you go to the hospital, and in this case, go back again, because the hospital may send you home, and in this case did send him home, and things got worse as a result. So talk to your family, talk to people close to you, and ensure that your brain is okay. So contact emergency medical services, and that includes the police, fire, anyone that is trained to respond in those areas. And if you're healthy enough, notify your insurance and tell them that you have been in an accident. So once you do that third thing, what are you really supposed to find out? Well, in terms of your belongings, like a vehicle is a valuable thing, making sure you know where it's going and you have say where it's going and what's going to be done to it. Make sure you're recording the incident as best you can. You want to make sure whenever possible that you have your own notes and your own material. So if your phone's handy or someone's there to witness the exchange, make sure you have that available to you. And don't admit guilt or fault, or don't say, well, I should have been doing this or should have been doing that. That's to be determined by the people that are trained to do that. There's a lot of cases where people will apologize and admit to things, and it turns out it wasn't their fault at all. And in the long run, when you're going towards long-term care or access to things, fault does matter, because there are benefits that are attached to insurance. Attached to that's also something called a tort. A tort is defined in the law as a civil wrong. It's something that was wrong and done to you, but not criminal. And you can actually pursue further benefits through that wrong that was done to you. So, but if you were to admit that can be used against you. Having said that, I understand that this is in the moment and that you would be in a pretty vulnerable situation. You'd have a lot of adrenaline pumping through your body. So in the event that you've done something and you regret it, or you feel it was the wrong thing to do, that's okay. That isn't the end of the world, and no one in any way is blaming you for making that mistake in a situation of duress. But if you can, don't admit to anything. Just allow people to assess the situation and answer the questions you're being asked. So the next thing is, how you get treated after will depend very highly on what benefits you have. So if you have a time machine and you're in this accident, but you can go back in time, some of the things that you would want to make sure that you have on your file is enhanced benefits. So enhanced benefits are the care and support that you get after the accident. So rehabilitation costs are capped. There's a limit on how much can be spent on it. That limit, if you don't have enhanced benefits, is $65,000 right now. And that does go fast when you're paying people like occupational therapists, physiotherapists, psychiatrists. You're having assessments done. But you purchase enhanced benefits, even though they may not change the cost of your premium at all, benefits go up to $1 million available under a lot of plans. So 65,000 can mean that your rehabilitation can end in less than a year, unless you're deemed what's called catastrophic, which we will talk about later. And you don't need to know all of these things, and I can answer questions later, or I'll actually put an email up at the end if there's further questions. But purchasing enhanced benefits, even though they may not cost you any money, can go increase your benefits by almost 20 times what you may have without them. Income replacement. That's another area where if you've purchased income replacement, that means that they will cover a portion of what you were making if you were working at the time you were injured. But without it, they tend to cap income replacement at $400 a week, which, if you do the math on $400 a week, it actually factors in a little bit less than what minimum wage is in Canada at this point. So, but with proper income replacement, it can actually cover a higher portion of your salary. Accident forgiveness is always good, which means you don't get higher premiums going through all of this other thing. Because the one thing that happens when you're in an accident is a good chance that you're not going to be able to go back to work right away. And very quickly, the financial pain starts to set in. All of a sudden, it's difficulty making your rent or paying your mortgage. There's difficulty making the payments in your life. Credit card bills start to pile up. And it can be incredibly exasperating, especially when you're trying to recover. I've seen so many people return to work early, go back into working full time when their health should be their full-time job at that point. Their health should be what they do day in and day out. That's your 40-hour-a-week full-time job. And you've seen people go back to waiting tables, to janitorial work, to construction. And in the worst cases, they get injured again because they're not willing to go back, or their brain recovers less than it than it could. Any instruction on post-concussion injuries are rest, rest, rest until you feel you're fully recovered, and not having the replacement of your income, the recovery of your or an increase in premiums attached to your insurance, all those things are going to shrink your income, your family's income, and you're going to be in a place where you're not going to have the time to fully recover. Loss of use in the claim limits, which means like when you actually lost the use of your vehicle, and or you have to purchase a new vehicle, making sure that those limits you're under the impression of what you have available to you. And when someone actually is offering you to replace your car after an accident, making sure you're actually getting the value of that, and knowing that you have a right to say no to what they offer you. And this is the most important part of all of this. You're after an accident, you've been injured, your brain may not be working well, you may be undergoing quite a bit of trauma. Talk to someone close to you about what to do. Ask questions, get advice wherever is necessary. Don't be alone in these situations whenever possible. And then that brings us to the next question, which is a big one, which is lawyer. When to call a lawyer in these scenarios, and when to actually seek out legal advice. I'm of the impression that more information is always good. So anytime you can get additional information on what to do, it's probably a good idea. But lawyers are intimidating, and they can be even more intimidating when you're sitting in an office and speaking to them. So one thing that is generally a good idea is if you do know someone that has gone through the process, asking their advice of who someone that's not going to be too intimidating to speak to could be, and how you could get in touch with them. So, but when you seek a lawyer, the priority, if you seek a lawyer, make sure that their priority is you. And if you're unhappy, you are the consumer, you are the person that can change that person if you need to. And even if you're at fault, because we made a point earlier about being at fault, you still are insured for your medical needs, and you still can seek support. And like, make no mistake, like when you contact a lawyer, you're talking about suing your insurance company and potentially the company that of the person that you were harmed by, or that you were in the accident with. So when you do that, it is very stressful. Litigation is stressful, and but the good thing is when you do seek out a lawyer in these cases, the consultation in personal injury tends to be free. So don't pay a lawyer when you're going in. And the important point about getting representation is, yes, you can get money, but the other part that's important is the idea of going through formal rehabilitation. So anyone with experience in the health system in Canada knows how strained the health system is. And this really does highlight that within the public system, very little rehabilitation support is going to be available to you. And under the laws in Ontario and in Canada, if you're injured in a car or as a result of a motor vehicle accident, you're not the responsibility of the taxpayer, you are the responsibility of the insurance company, at least the rehabilitation portion of your care is. So when you have coverage, the first thing to try and find out is, what does your coverage afford? So some of these initials that are going are just initials, so I can kind of say them out loud and what they mean. So you want to find out if your coverage affords you an OT. An OT is an occupational therapist. An occupational therapist assesses your day-to-day functioning and how you function on a daily basis. So if you were working, they're going to look at how you are after an accident and say, how good am I? How fit is this person to return to work, and what limitations they have? They're going to do the same thing at home. How are you doing laundry? How are you getting ready for work? How are you preparing meals, going shopping, all those things that you do to, in day-to-day life. An occupational therapist is going to assess and determine whether or not your injury is impacting that in any way. A PT is a physiotherapist, and that's the person that's going to look at your body and see how your body's working after the accident. So do you get dizzy? How's your walking? Is the strength on both sides of your body okay? Can you lift the same amount? And they'll make recommendations for exercise and limits. They'll tell you things you shouldn't do. You shouldn't climb a ladder. You shouldn't cut the grass anymore. You shouldn't necessarily lift anything over 10 pounds. Like, that's something that you'll get from a physiotherapist, as well as some suggestions on how to get better. SLP stands for a speech and language pathologist. So a speech and language pathologist is going to look at your speech. With post-concussion injuries, with brain injuries, speech can be affected. It can affect word find. People can develop stutters. They can develop slurs in their speech. And all of that makes it really difficult to function, makes it really difficult to return to work and to return to family life, whatnot. A rehabilitation therapist is someone that comes more often than a speech and language physiotherapist or an occupational therapist. And they're there to kind of take instructions from those people and kind of help you day to day develop new routines. Personal support worker is there to do some of the things that you were unable to do after your accident. So if you're struggling to cook for yourself, a PSW is there to cook for you. If you're struggling to clean or do laundry, a PSW, a personal support worker, would come in and help with those things. And then the final role that I'll talk about is a case manager, and the case manager themselves is kind of the conductor of all these people, but also other medical needs. They may refer you to hearing specialists, sleep clinics, things of that nature. So that's their role. The next thing with rehabilitation is you may be sent to appointments after an accident, after an injury. And in those instances, make sure you know who's sending you. It is very possible you're being sent by insurance and that you're not going to necessarily a friendly environment. It doesn't necessarily mean the environment's not going to be friendly. The experiences of people who have been through this find the process very stressful, though. So knowing who is sending you, who's responsible for the costs, who, if you're paying for parking or paying for transit or driving there, knowing what responsibility it is to absorb those costs. And then the other piece that's really important is bring support with you if it is something that you don't quite trust. If you don't necessarily have some of the people above that are there supporting you yet, bring a family member, bring a friend, just bring someone with you to help you through the situations. And always ask if you have questions. If you have questions on what you're being put through, make sure that you ask. So for medical needs, if you feel a major issue is being ignored, make sure that it's part of the conversation. It's especially post-injury, but even generally, when going to doctor's offices, when spending time with a medical person, you sometimes can feel rushed through the appointment. Medical people are busy, offices are busy. You can even sense that when you're sitting in a waiting room and you're late going in. But the worst thing to do in a situation like that is to ignore the things you're going through. If you have headaches, if you have dizziness, nausea, if you're not eating properly, if your sense of taste is off, like making sure that all of those things are covered in a medical discussion and covered in a medical visit. Advocating for yourself, which simply means that you're there representing yourself and pushing for the best outcomes for yourself as possible. And always ask questions. Remind doctors of your conditions. Doctors are a lot of times overwhelmed, have a ton of different things. And when they walk into your appointment, they may not remember. What you told them last time. So when he or she walks into the office and speaks to you about that, about your conditions, make sure you're reminding them. And if you have trouble remembering, see if someone can help you write things down or document what you need going into those appointments. The next thing is about expenses. So if you're paying for things that you wouldn't have paid for had you not been in an accident, you should be reimbursed for those things. So different things, and this is again things that someone who's gone through this has listed on things to keep track of. Your travel. So not just where you went, but how far that was, whether you drove or took the train or the bus. Household supplies. So if all of a sudden, like, there are a lot of forms in this line of work, and if you're going through ink and paper and things like that on your computer, if you had to change your internet plan to be able to keep doing this, if you're using a ton more phone data because you're having to do Zoom meetings with people, keeping track of all of that is help you not fall into some of those more extensive financial situations that take place post-accident. And the things that you can claim with receipts: parking, costs of printing, so mailing costs, so postage, tolls or highway charges if you're taking the 407 to an appointment and whatnot, and then public transit costs can also be claimed in these cases. So this term, catastrophic, this is a big term when people have been injured, and it's a big term when dealing with your insurance. So a catastrophic injury, you very well may be told is just the loss of a limb, meaning you've lost an arm or had a major physical loss. But a brain injury is also an invisible loss that can be considered catastrophic. It's just more difficult to prove than losing a limb, losing a leg, or an arm, but it can be just as impactful on someone's ability to function. But proving that injury is catastrophic can take a long time. But the difference in that is the same difference that I described with enhanced to non-enhanced benefits, which is that the phone's just ringing in the background, sorry, which means that a catastrophic injury goes from $65,000 in health benefits to $1 million in health benefits. So a lot of the work you do after you're injured is trying to establish whether or not you qualify as catastrophic, because it sets much higher limits on what you're going to have in terms of benefits and in terms of your time to recover. So on its face, these are some of the things that if you have a lot of trouble with would be considered catastrophic. So an inability to eat, get in and out of a chair and get into bed, or get to standing, bathing, toileting, dressing yourself, and walking. However, you may be told that those are the things that would qualify you, but these things can impact it as well, along with the ability to work. And it's a cumulative impact that will tell the person assessing you whether or not you would qualify for benefits. So if you were a very active person, or a very artistic person, or a very social person, and those things were removed from your life, your life isn't just your daily functions. Your life isn't just the things you do to survive each day. Your quality of life is something that also needs to be assessed, and taking the time to think about those things and thinking about, I was in this accident. Before I was in this accident, I did all these things with my time. And since I've been in, I don't do any of those things anymore. And yeah, I still feed myself, and I still go to bed and up in the morning, and I can walk, and I can see, and I can hear, but I don't have a quality of life anymore. Like that's something that has to be assessed. Or my quality of life is diminished significantly. Can't work anymore. Can't. I don't get the same enjoyment out of things I did before. That's much more abstract, but it's definitely something that when talking about this with someone that's been through it, very much was emphasized that you need to think about your whole life and not just these things that are basic to what we think of as being alive. The description I was given is that it's the difference between being alive and living. So what is the inability to work? Well, it depends on the field you're in, for sure. But you shouldn't lose the field that you've trained for or that you like just because you were injured in an accident. So an example of an inability to work is a kindergarten teacher that can't handle noise or has no patience, or a musician that can't handle background noise or noisy environments, a service in the service industry where you can't be on your feet all day. All those things would be losing an ability to work and factored into making a claim on being injured. I want to say and emphasize that I'm not trained as an occupational therapist, and that the actual legislation is a real thing, and that there are much more sophisticated definitions of this. But and I do recommend, seeking those out. What this is I'm kind of paraphrasing a firsthand account of the thing a person experienced when they had an injury. So this was another thing that was factored in. So taking all this information, like, what are some basic lessons that the person that designed this presentation wants to pass on? So the first one is, do not engage in try to please behavior. Now, what he meant by this is we are all interested in being liked, and we're all interested in being accepted by people around us. But what you really wanted to emphasize is that doesn't really matter. This is the rest of your life. So make sure that you're actually asserting yourself. You're saying what you need to have said. And if you have to say it again, that you are saying it again. Get witnesses. So if you were in an accident, or even after the accident, if people notice you've been acting differently, if you seem like a different person, if you're behaving differently, remember, you only have one brain. Your brain's not necessarily going to notice every change in your behavior. You may need to rely on other people to point that out to this. And immediately appoint things like dizziness, confusion, slurred speech, memory issues with sleep, and a myriad of issues that can happen if your brain's been injured. But make sure that as soon as you notice things like that you address them, because they could be life-changing, but they can also be life-threatening. So in that event, make sure that you're doing that. And if you have been injured, speak to someone that can help you, and a lawyer will often speak to you at low costs. I'm also happy to offer my email, where I can send you to somebody that may be able to give you some advice. Again, I want to state that I'm not qualified as a therapist. I'm not a regulated healthcare professional. Like, my role here is to relay an individual's experience, and relay what his experience taught him. However, there are people that can certainly walk you through that. But step one would be a legal professional that knows how to navigate this system. So that's the presentation as a whole, but I'm also happy to answer any questions that have arose.
Thank you for presenting all of that information. That was very informative.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot. Well, let me know if there's any issue with the recording, or any issue with the material.
So Jeff, it's Linda. I have a question.
Sure.
A lot of people come to us and say they have like regret for settling too early. Is there any next steps that they can take if they've signed something off and then really find that they can't live on what they settled?
What I would say is I would seek out someone in the legal profession that can look at how the case was handled. If there was an error in law or an error in representation, that could result in some changes, but I would speak to someone with legal expertise in that area and have your case reviewed, like have the settlement reviewed.
Right.
So it really, I'm certain it would depend on the scenario. I would assume that the only chance you might have is that your injury made it so you weren't able to make an informed decision.